This episode of The Benefit Whisperer is brought to you by Route 3 Insurance and Financial Services, where smarter benefits begin. If you're tired of rising healthcare costs and opaque insurance contracts, Route 3 is here to help you take control. They specialize in transparent, employer-driven benefit strategies that protect your people and your bottom line. Ready to break away from the status quo? Visit www.fixmybenefitsnow.com and discover how Route 3 can help you build a plan that actually works for your team and for your budget.
And welcome to this special edition of the Benefit Whisperer podcast with Ralph Weber. Longtime listeners know Ralph is a tireless advocate for fixing a healthcare system that's gone awry and failing millions of Americans. Businesses who've worked with Ralph know him as a financial warrior who fights fearlessly to contain and control healthcare costs while ensuring that their employees keep the best healthcare they possibly can afford. In today's podcast, Ralph is joined by advocates for change. One of those advocates is a very successful businessman who is now putting his money where his mouth is when it comes to healthcare. All of today's participants believe not only that we can do better where our healthcare system is concerned, but that we must do better. So welcome to the podcast. And Ralph, I'm really looking forward to this one. I'm excited. You and I've talked quite a bit before today.
Yeah. So am I, Bill. Really, this has been, I've been looking forward to this for a long time. Honestly, though, I feel kind of like Howard Beale. Mark, do you remember Howard Beale?
Yes.
From Network?
I'm mad as hell and I'm not going to take it anymore.
Exactly. So I'm sitting here, mic on, staring at healthcare contracts. I feel that read like bad fiction, with friction. Prices that vanish after 3 months, payments that ghost you, spread pricing, opaque rebates, families pushed toward bankruptcy every 58 seconds from medical bills. And you know what, Mark? I'm mad as hell and I'm not going to take it anymore. But
we just need to get you a window, Ralph, to scream out of. That's all.
Exactly. Yeah, I've got a window, but it doesn't open. I can't pull it open, so I might just break it. But think about the patients. Out-of-pocket costs have gotten so high. It feels like they're driving a Ford Pinto with a full tank of gas and Firestone 500 tires. One pothole, one denial, one surprise bill, and boom, total blowout. And then, of course, they're the doctors and hospitals. They deliver care, but they have no idea if they'll get paid, when they'll get paid, or how much. Because healthcare contracts don't define payments like normal contracts do. They define how to argue about payment, not what payment will actually be. And really, that's why we're here today. So let me bring in our guests. Of course, we have Mark Cuban, entrepreneur, Shark Tank Shark. And he is the guy behind Cost Plus Drugs and Cost Plus Wellness, who's been blowing up the middleman. And from Stanford University, we have Dr. Kevin Schulman, a physician, professor of medicine, and health economist, and David Scheinker, also a health economist who leads the design at Lucille Packard Children's Hospital. They're the brains on the groundbreaking work on computable payer contracts. So, Kevin, David, Mark, welcome. But, nobody's pretending that this system isn't broken. But while we're still mad as hell, Mark, sorry, I have to ask, it's March Madness, and you're a proud Indiana guy, a Hoosier. But the scariest bracket right now, it isn't even the tournament. It's the damn hospital bill, isn't it?
Right. I don't know all the details, but they're definitely trying to change the game. And that's a good thing. Go Hoosiers.
Yeah, exactly. So who's going to fix this? Who's got the fix? Is it a matter of ripping up the contracts? Is it making payments instant and certain? Or is it just admitting the whole thing is rigged? So Mark, you said you're mad as hell. You've talked about the big insurers as often detrimental to patients and employers with unaffordable deductibles, low net payments to independent doctors. To what extent do you see today's healthcare prices incorporating a premium for payment uncertainty, delays, denials, or partial reimbursements?
You got to look at the bigger picture. When you have companies that have thousands of subsidiaries, do hundreds of billions in sales, do $160 billion in intercompany transfers for just one company in a year, something's wrong. And then you look underneath the covers there and you realize how badly they're gaming the system. And, the low-hanging fruit example is how they game medical loss ratios. And so these companies, 70% of their revenues are from taxpayers. And part of their obligation to taxpayers is to spend at least 80, if not 85% of their premiums on care. But what they don't tell you is they control via contracting or employment 10% of the doctors in the country. And if you get those 10% of those doctors or the clinics or the centers or the hospitals, whatever type of provider they work for, charging that insurance company more, they reach their medical loss ratio sooner. They reach their obligation to the law and the government, yet they retain the premium that they charge themselves back in the hands of the physicians or the provider of any type that they own, right?
Yeah.
That should be illegal, but it's not. And part two to all that problem, this is not a secret. It's not like, I see David shaking his head. It's not like everybody doesn't know this is the game that they play, but they look at every instance of breaking the rules as just being, a risk reward equation. How much are they going to be fined? So for instance, we saw, who was it? ESI that ripped off the government $615 million recently. It's not their first rodeo where they've stolen from the taxpayers. It's not going to be the last, because other than getting, dinged for 10, 20, 40, 50 million, even $100 million, they're going to continue contracting with the government. We have nothing in place. So the first step is to say, if you are fined or found liable for anything that you do that's wrong, the first time you get a mulligan. The second time in 5 years, you're prevented from doing business with federal or state government. You'll see their behavior change almost immediately. And then pari passu to that, there's the break up big medicine bill. You can't have an efficient market where there is that much control focused in just a few insurance companies, because they define the pricing where they have market dominance. And so when they define the pricing, as an entrepreneur, I'd love to compete with them in 20 other places. But I know that they tell, they tell brand manufacturers, especially drug manufacturers, don't deal with cost plus drugs, because their transparency makes it harder for us to have an information asymmetry with the payer, with the sponsors that we work with. And so if what we'll do is, if you work with cost plus drugs, and I've literally had pharmacy CEOs tell me this, if you work with cost plus drugs, we will diminish your positioning on our formularies, which can cost them tens of millions, hundreds of millions, $1 billion or more in revenues if they go from a tier 1 to a tier 3 or precluded from this plan or that plan. And so when you look at all these as a whole, and I can give you 50 other scenarios, right, where they just distort the economics. And in fact, I'll give you one that a follow the money example, and you can tell me to shut up at any time. So every year, all of us, right, we make a decision on what plans we're going to choose from the new plans that are offered by our employer, the ACA, wherever it is, we get our insurance, right? And there's, they raise the deductibles on some, they raise or lower the premiums on others, and we make determinations on what we choose. The one thing that never happens is the determination whether or not that member can afford their deductible. You can have great insurance with a company that has $1,500 deductible. But if you're one of the 40% of people in this country that can't afford a $400 emergency expense, you're shit out of luck.
Yeah.
So, and look at like ACA Silver plans. The typical ACA Silver plan for a family has a $5,000 deductible. Now, what happens if somebody is in a wreck, right? Whether you are an ACA plan or a $1,500 deductible for a company, $2,500, whatever it is, and you have $100 to your name. You go to the doctor, let's say, and the doctor says, wow, I definitely want to help you. I definitely want to live up to my Hippocratic oath, but you only have $100. And I need to get you past your deductible hurdle so that I can collect money from the insurance company. So what does that provider do? They loan you the money. So you mentioned medical bankruptcies. That's the foundation of medical bankruptcies, because those providers typically have to loan money or the patient has to borrow from an external source. Now, wait, there's more, right? Because in doing so, we literally have turned providers and hospitals specifically into subprime lenders because you can't expect that money to be paid, and it's not. So immediately, because of the insurance system that these big insurance companies have created for healthcare, we create one bucket where the hospitals know they're going to lose a lot of money. So that's one sunken bucket of lost money. Then we look at the price transparency files and we say, okay, these companies, these big insurance companies have contracted with these hospitals and providers, and any schmuck with a credit card can walk in and get a better price than what they contracted with. Why is that? Well, when you look at it, what do insurance providers do with insurance carriers do with providers? Well, if that hip replacement is tagged at $35,000 in Dallas, Texas, and Mark needs his hip replaced, is my insurance company, if it's a big insurer, are they going to pay the full $35,000? No. They always underpay. And not only do they always underpay, and feel free to jump in and correct me if you guys think I'm wrong on this, not only do they always underpay, they late pay. And not always do they late pay, they always do an audit after the fact at the end of the year, if not sooner, and they claw back, right? So those are three additional buckets where the hospitals or providers are saying, oh my goodness, but wait, there's more. We can talk about pre-authorizations. Pre-authorizations are fine, but the denials, right, come fast and furious. And the denials are rarely about denying care. The majority of denials are about delaying payment because you get the time value of money. You get to
Mm-hmm.
hold on to those premium dollars and make, 4 or 5%, whatever it is, wherever you invest, if not more. And so you can go down the list of all these things. So now the insurance companies have created these buckets of lost revenue, lost cash flow for providers. So then the providers, they need to make up for all that money. So what do? They invent dumb shit like facilities fees. That's like me at the Mavs having a cup fee for your beer. The beer is only $3, but that cup fee is $5,000 because you need that cup, right? It's just purely insane. They abuse 340B, right? They send you the EOBs that use their charge master, knowing that you shouldn't pay, but hoping that you do,
Mm-hmm.
right? And putting people who don't understand how all this works in stress, in bad positions. And the high market share, particularly the high market share providers, are almost as bad as the insurance companies. But I think the whole thing starts with the scale of the biggest insurance companies and the plans that they define, knowing that it's in their best interest if the member cannot afford their deductible.
Right. Yeah, I'm totally tracking with you on everything there. And they initially they of course overcharge the employer, and then on the audit they charge 30% for what they saved, right?
That's the game Ryan always talks about,
Yeah.
right? Which is where it's like, let me tell you the benchmarking, right? They always create these benchmarks that they define, and then they call it value-based care. Value-based care is a crime, right? Because if and I know a lot of people like to talk about it as a benefit, but there's no definitive benchmarks to determine what the cost should be because hospitals don't even know what their own costs are. They have no clue what their costs are, so they invent these prices. Put aside ChargeMaster, right? When you want to get into it with the CFOs to talk about their actual cost accounting, one of my favorite things to do when I talk to hospitals is, can you give me a bill of materials for a hip replacement?
Mm-hmm.
What's a bill of materials? How do you
Exactly.
guys, and where we see it with cost plus drugs, we have something called cost plus marketplace, where hospitals come in and buy sterile injectables. And now we're adding devices. Like the way hospitals buy these things, we will get a list of their purchases and it'll include their price. And then we show them our prices, and maybe for a couple things they'll buy, but we'll say, hey, you're big enough, we can save you $4 million a year. And they'll buy $100,000 worth. And then I'll go back at Stanford Grand Rounds. I would talk to the CEO and I'm like, we can save you all this money. At Penn Medical Grand Rounds, we showed them we could save them $4 million a year. And then we looked at their purchasing and it was a fraction of that. And we're like, what's the deal? We could say, oh, we can't get the purchasing people to do it. The people in the supply chain that deal with it, right? They don't
Yeah.
report directly to me and da 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 da, right?
Right.
And so the whole thing is just a mess.
Hmm.
And the whole foundation of it, and we talk about AI. AI can't fix broken.
Right. Well, my view, Mark, on AI is the system, the foundation, the architecture is so broken. If you put AI on top of it, it will accelerate the crumble, not fix it.
Yeah, I
So
mean,
this is a
when you look at AI and you look at technology in general, sorry, one last, when you look at technology in general, everything within the healthcare system is an arbitrage.
Hmm.
When you have a
Sure.
$5 trillion industry, if you can just save a fraction of that, somebody's going to make a lot of money. And so everybody, it's like revenue cycle management. Now RCM with AI, it sounds like new Coke, right? It's
Yeah.
like, we're going to see if our AI could abuse your AI before your AI abuses our AI by upcoding and downcoding and miscoding and recoding, when there shouldn't be any need for RCM at all. If your hospital uses
Agree.
RCM instead of having somebody internally that knows what they're doing so that you can do it the right way according to the law and the rules, you should be fired.
Yeah. Yeah. And if you had an employee that ripped off $615, you wouldn't fine him $100 and then let him keep working, would you?
Oh,
Of course not.
no, the only question would be, do we press charges?
Yeah.
And it's just crazy that because they're too big to care.
Yeah, exactly.
And the
Exactly.
unfortunate part in this industry, when they lie, patients die.
Hmm. Hmm. So,
so
Mark,
why we're so
let's jump
excited.
to,
Oh,
yeah. Sorry, David. I was just going to bring you in. And I agree on RCM too. One of the big insurance companies now charging for it. So, Kevin and David, how does your work fit in with what Mark's doing here? Your work on computable payer contracts and stuff.
Let me jump in. This is
Okay,
yeah,
Kevin.
it's wonderful to hear Mark talk. And from an outside observer who this was not his core business, and look at how he's looked at the pathologies of all this. I mean it. And he can go on. He was a grand round speaker here at Stanford. He can go on longer, which is great. And his description's incredibly accurate.
Hmm.
You know,
Yes.
and detailed. And so the question is, what do we do about that? He's brought up there's misbehavior of every firm in the market, whichever way you look. And
Hmm.
so one of the things we have to understand is no one's in charge of the market. No one's in charge. There's no one to complain to.
Right.
The large health plans are ERISA plans that are exempt from state regulation all the way through. And so one of the things that we've been asking is, great, this is an accurate description of the problem. What do we do next? And one of the things we did was, underlying all this is these are all analog business processes that we
Yes.
digitize. They're never created as digital processes. So how do we shift the market? And so we did a project where we actually looked um, at this question of how do you go from analog to digital, from bespoke to standardized, and we found 82 different firms and markets that have done some or all of this at scale. So all of this is doable. They're great examples of how that can occur.
Kevin, doesn't it come down to the CEO of the self-insured employer knowing their business?
It does. It also, but it also is the idea that if you were, if you're, for running your business, right? You're doing a lot to make it better for your business, but the hospitals are just pushing those costs onto somebody else, and the health plans are pushing. So, how do we go from 30% administrative costs in U.S. healthcare to 2 to 3% or
Well,
5%?
the CEOs don't sign contracts with the people who are ripping them off because they're not even necessary. There's no
Yeah.
reason for PBMs to exist. There's no reason for the carriers to have those complicated contracts. Like I'm telling, like Ralph, if you send me all copies of your contracts, I'll put them in Claude. And I tell every CEO, put your insurance company contract and your PBM contract in the Claude and just say, tell me where I'm getting ripped off and what I can do
Yeah.
about it.
Yeah.
Yep.
So one question is, how do we move the market, everyone in the market at the same time? And so we've been grappling with that. I mean, does that require someone to oversee? One of the ideas we have is create a new entity to oversee transactions in healthcare. So, the Federal Reserve is in charge of all payment processes, tries to standardize bank transactions. Can we get someone to do the same thing? Don't worry about how we pay for it. Keep a mixed public-private financing system, but have a standard transaction system, right?
And what was that? What would that change? Would you make it public so that everybody got to see every transaction and to see, how it was coded and, what it would apply to?
Yeah, or at least a set of public rules for sure. Um, I think, and we could talk about it. David's done amazing work in terms of the details, and some of our students, in terms of the details of coding and some of the details of transaction process. But I guess over this, we have to move the market, all of the market at the same time. If I move
Yeah.
one firm, I haven't
But
changed
why
it.
would any of the big insurance companies, you know, give an okay to allow participation by their customers?
Um, so another idea we had was under ERISA. So under ERISA, employers are now liable for being a fiduciary. So, but what does that mean?
But
So,
so are the PBMs now too, right? With the new laws.
yeah, but imagine we established criteria for what a fiduciary is as an employer,
So
and
Kevin,
that you could only contract with a firm that does digital contracting
Mhm.
as your.
Yeah, but it still comes down to the CEO and making a determination, right? You can make that CEO a fiduciary, but they still have to understand what they're doing. And then, they have to, because they're already incented to change how they do their healthcare benefits. It's their second largest line item, and every penny they save goes right to the bottom line.
Yeah,
So there's
exactly.
already plenty of incentive there for them to change how they do business.
Yeah,
And
So
and,
I
and keep
think
in
there
mind,
are. I think
sorry to
there are.
interrupt, David. One second. I just want to jump on to what Mark's saying. It's important to understand that insurance companies in the self-insured environment, the employer, the plan is in essence the insurance company. You're self-insured. So even though you use a TPA, and it might be a BUCA, it might be an independent, you are the insurer. So sorry, Kevin, David, go ahead.
Yeah. So every time I have a question about our benefits here at Stanford, and I call the benefits office, they put me through to Mercer. They won't even answer my questions
Hmm.
anymore. So
Yeah.
yes, we run our own plan on quote unquotes, but it's outsourced to the benefits consultant who's getting paid by the health plan. So it's,
Well, then you should
uh,
fire whoever is in charge of that. That's your problem.
oh,
Literally,
I
right?
agree.
Because they're probably going on vacation with them too, and going on, trips and the rest. That, I mean, the one thing we have that we know is a constant is the CEOs are starting to recognize that their second largest expense line item after payroll is healthcare benefits. And that every dollar they save goes right to the bottom line. If you're a public company, you have 100 million shares, you save 50 million, you're saving 50 cents a share. That should be enough incentive for them to do the right thing once they're educated.
Yeah. I mean, one of the issues is they could save that money by doing a better job negotiating with the plans or the providers, or they could raise the deductible.
Yeah,
And
but you see, it doesn't work.
no,
See, yeah, because when you raise the deductible, fewer people get care, more people call out sick, their kids call out sick, etc.
well, we did. One of my colleagues did a study a long time ago. I was at Duke at the time, and basically, our low-income employees couldn't use our benefits. They didn't have the
Right,
money
because
to
they couldn't
pay.
afford the
Yeah.
deductible. Yeah,
Right,
Yeah.
but even
So,
for pharmacy, they couldn't afford the cost share.
right,
but to
right.
Mark, to your
No, we see that all the
specific,
time. That's why cost plus drugs in business.
so to your specific question about what can the CEO do, there's kind of two chicken and the egg problems. Putting a contract in Claude to ask, "Am I getting ripped off?" That's a good step, but if there were more direct contracts like you're trying to do in publishing, which we love, then the CEOs would have more options to see this transparent, no middleman opportunity. But first, there need to be more of those contracts. Same thing for the hospital. Hospital like Stanford, we'd love clean, easy transactions and direct higher prices with lower wait times, but we need a large enough network of employers or other customers to make that worthwhile.
many salespeople do you have out there calling on employers?
None that I know of, which is
Exactly.
but we're very excited
Exactly.
about what you're doing. This in our research
No, I
for
know. And we
years.
would love to see you publish. See, you have me as your salesperson. That's why you publish the contracts on Cost Plus Wellness, because that's what Ryan and I do and others, right? I've spent most of my time talking to CEOs and explaining to them how they're getting ripped off across the board. And, because none of them think, and I went through the same thing with my companies before we started Cost Plus. I had my guy who was my broker slash consultant who told me every year, hey, we're only increasing your cost 5%. Everybody else is 7 or 8 or 9%. And then I did a comparison of my pricing versus cost plus pricing once we started, and I was getting ripped off horrifically,
Yeah.
horrifically. And that's the case when you start delving in, and I give a list of things for these companies to do. Now, the hard part, and I think to Kevin's point, what is it that we can do that assists these companies to deal with the fact that they're getting ripped off? And that's something Ryan and I work on daily. You need to have a healthcare CEO at your company. You need to have an internal TPA that is only aligned with your interest and the wellness of your members. Until you do that, you are completely dependent on an external company that is trying to figure out this morass of a healthcare system that we have, that it's going to be very, very difficult for them to take care of you in the way you need to be taken care of.
Yeah.
And that's like when we talk to Baylor Scott and White, we're like, train TPAs and how your whole system works. Are you guys familiar with Palantir, the company? And well, Palantir, they do a lot of government transactions and everything. Not a big fan of how they've run, but one thing that they do, they do what they call forward engineering. And I used to do this in my systems integration company 30, 40 years ago, where we would put people on site to implement and explain and train all the things, all the software that we wrote, all the changes that we are making. And that's, I think, the next step in direct contracting. And so Ryan and I in our group talk all the time about training people, or, getting a TPA that we know is going to be above board and honest and straightforward, and having them put somebody on site, because the hard part isn't the contract. The hard, maybe to a certain extent, getting a wide enough coverage with direct contracts is, but you can do a wraparound network to deal with it.
Sure.
And you can always negotiate when you're in an out of network situation. Anything you can schedule, you can negotiate. But having somebody who worked at a TPA come to work for your company at Stanford, as an example, so they don't just send you to Mercer, where Mercer, is not going to have potentially the best interest of the patient, you know. But even beyond that, I've started to name and shame the CEOs of companies. If you follow me on LinkedIn at Mark Cuban, you'll see I have no problem, because to your point, Ralph, the responsibility is ultimately for any self-insured employer, the responsibility is that of the CEO. And to your point, Kevin, on ERISA, right? The ultimate responsibility is to keep your members alive, for God's sakes, you know? And your CEO of a self-insured company probably doesn't even know when there's been a denial, definitely doesn't know that that denial could lead to that patient becoming progressively worse, disabled, horrific circumstances, or dies.
Yeah.
And that's, nobody has been out there calling me. And every single time I've named and shamed somebody, within hours, it's been resolved. And what I've been telling people since then, CEOs since then, you need to get a report for every denial that you have for your members, so that you can review it. Because if you think it's bad now with healthcare and what's going on in this country, wait until somebody tragically dies because your ASO denied something that cost $75,000 that you could have approved and saved somebody's life.
Yeah.
Ralph, one of the questions is, so these things have been festering for a long time. I mean,
They have.
Mark's engaged, which is great. Is a limited number of people that are really engaged in trying to solve the problem, right? There aren't many in this country. And so the question is, why now? What's different? So at a national level, we're going to have a healthcare debate in 28, in the midterms and really in 28. And unfortunately, neither party right now has a plan like to address any of the issues he's talking about. Um, and then, so one thing is we need to put that together now. We need not just at a firm level, but at a market level and a national level. How do we
About the
solve
break
this?
up big medicine bill?
I think we have to, we'd have to get into the details of what all this stuff is, but how do we get the market? The overarching goal should be our market. The transaction cost in our market should be no different than with a credit card, like 2 to
Yeah, but is
3%.
it really the transaction cost? The transaction cost in terms of the money, the payments, the
But
payment
it's
rails.
the costs are all the stuff you've been talking about, the denials, the
Right,
craziness,
right,
you know,
right.
the poor
But
quality
those are,
products, the
but
bad
those aren't
referrals.
transaction driven. Now those are per member per month driven, and those are denial driven. Those are deductible driven. That's before the transaction even happens.
I mean,
We've got
we're about to get two things that are going to add to the issue. So you've already talked about AI and bad processes. So we're going to have chatbot wars. So as bad as it is to get paid right now in an analog world, it's going to be even worse in an AI world where payers are setting their AI chatbots to not resolve issues.
Yeah,
Like,
the agents that they're using, it's
yeah.
an agent battle, one versus the other, for sure.
right,
So
right. I
so
mean, we've
that's
gotten to
going
the
to
point
gum up the
where,
works. But
yeah. Go ahead,
the other
Kevin.
one is underneath all of this, our analog system's incredibly vulnerable to fraud. And it's
And when you
not
say
just that.
analog, Kevin, I'm confused. Tell me, when you say analog, what are you referring to?
Well, when you have when you're doing that transaction and you're trying to resolve it, you share a piece of paper or you pick up the phone, right? I mean, at the end of the day, the underlying infrastructure is all
The
analog.
resolution, yeah. Well, that's going to chatbots and this, but to your point, there's still fax machines.
Yeah. But, um, but all of this is incredibly vulnerable to fraud. So, the thing that ChatGPT is really good at is creating a CMS 1500 billing. We have no idea who's submitting a claim. We have no idea if an encounter ever occurred. We have no idea who you are as a patient. There's no pull. I love to in class. I make everyone look at my insurance card, and there's not one digital thing on it. There's no barcode. There's no chip. You don't know who I am, even if you
That's a good
Xerox it.
point, right? So what you're saying is anybody with an insurance card can show up. And if you've got good insurance or you can afford the deductible, if you would steal someone's insurance card, you could get surgery and no one will know the difference.
Yeah, but now that was in the analog world. Yeah, there are these stories of people who came in for appendicitis and their appendix already been out. But now it's digital, right? I could create everything as using AI. I could fabricate who the patient is. I can fabricate who the provider is. I can fabricate the
Right.
type
And
of service.
simplified the fraud, right? The fraud becomes just another agentic process
Yeah.
from the AI. And you can just, and yeah, unless you have a filter on the other side, it doesn't know any better, just like phishing in some respects.
We have an insurance card that has a QR code on it. As soon as the provider scans it, it takes them to a payment page. They see the picture of the patient. The patient is there and approves payment on the spot. So it's a two-way process where they're right in front of there. But to everybody's point here, we've gotten to the point where average premiums for a family are what? 28, 30 grand. And then out of pocket maximums are over 20.
That's the employer side. That's only the employer side, right?
Well, the employee side, the deductibles on,
Yeah, the employer side with the deductible, because I
yeah,
thought
yeah.
for me it was $30,000 on my side.
Yeah, you're talking about the stop loss premium, the spec, right?
Oh, I'm talking about just how much we're paying to cover the premiums for the family.
Right. 30 grand to cover the premiums for the family, and then they have another 20,000 out of pocket. So
Right,
they
right,
need
right, right,
insurance on their insurance before they can
right.
even use it, you know?
Well,
And then
Ryan has heard me say this all the time. If you want a school loan,
Mhm.
the federal government will guarantee that loan and loan you some money, right? If you have a small business that just went on Shark Tank and got a deal, you could go to the SBA and they'll guarantee a loan for you and buy down some of it in some cases. If you want a house, they'll guarantee a portion of your loan. And some cities or states will give you your first down payment on your first house, right? If you want to go to Indiana University and party your brains out because they won the national championship, go Hoosiers, and drop out after the first semester, they'll loan you the money and they'll guarantee other money. If you get into a horrific car wreck and can't afford your deductible, good luck to you.
Yeah, you're
And
on your
so
own.
you're on your own, right? And so we've got to do something that helps people on the deductible side. And I think to Kevin's point and David's point, that gives us the right to ask for something in return.
So,
Because then the hospitals, their losses decline, right? You can ask them to do cost accounting. You can ask them for better pricing, because otherwise they're the subprime lender.
so those
Right.
are all
And,
examples
you know,
of
hospitals
people
have become the
underwriting
biggest.
risk.
Yeah.
And
And
then,
hospitals have become the biggest collection agencies in the country. You
Mm-hmm.
know, where 1/3 of the cost that the allowable charges are never going to be collected because of the deductible cliff. And I'm writing a paper on this, and it's sort of in draft form. But you know what my proposition is, look, you're never going to receive this anyway. So they're pricing in sort of an unreceivable premium, if you will. A normal contract says if you deliver A, we will pay you B within C amount of time. Healthcare contract doesn't say anything like that at all. If you order something from Amazon, you
It's a
had a
bigger
healthcare
problem.
yeah. Go
It's a
ahead, Mark.
bigger problem because
Right.
those losses, those credit losses, are defined not by the contract between the insurance company and the provider, but by the contract between the insurance company and the member or their employer, right? And so the provider has absolutely no say in that whole thing. And that's the underlying fundamental problem. So then the next question becomes, do we need insurance companies for self-insured employers in particular? And the answer is no, because those insurance companies, the biggest insurance companies, either are only ASOs, yet they're determining the denials, they're determining the negotiations, they're determining prices, they're determining deductibles, they're determining whether a cash pay out of pocket should be applied to the deductible, something every employer and every benefits consultant should make sure happens, right? But beyond that, they're just a bank. 70% of the biggest insurance companies' revenues come from the taxpayer. These people are just banks. And
Mhm.
so rather than including you doing this with insurance companies, why not direct contract and act as a bank for your employees, your members? Get stop loss insurance, because you're taking the responsibility anyways. So when you have a member who, and you're a self-insured employer, you take full responsibility for everything except for the member out of pocket.
Right.
There's no reason for you not to take responsibility for the member out of pocket if by
Exactly.
doing
Yeah.
so, you can negotiate a better price with the provider that more than compensates because the provider's taking all the risk for the member out of pocket, right? And so what Ryan and I are trying to do is literally set up a bank program where people would take the amount of money that they would pay otherwise for an ACA Silver plan and deposit that in the bank, not an HSA because it's not attached to an insurance plan, right? But effectively works like an HSA plan without the tax benefits.
Mhm.
In doing so, we're able to go to, well, let me take a step back. So by allowing it's not even a member, by allowing the individual to now, let's just say their ACA plan premium is $1,500. If they commit to depositing $1,500 a month forever, and it goes up and down a little bit as they get older, it goes up some, right? As they have a family, it goes up some. They'll put it in a bank account, earn interest just like a checking account. It's their money, but they can only use it on healthcare, like an
Right.
HSA. But
Yeah.
here's the key. If they have something horrific happen, right? We're already taking out some of that money for stop loss insurance, and we're taking out some of that money for direct primary care, so that they're covered at the top end, they're helped at the bottom end, and in between, let's just say the stop loss is $30,000. We'll loan them the money. The bank or the company will loan them the money. No insurance companies whatsoever, just a TPA or whoever to manage
Mhm.
all of it.
You know, I was
And now all
talking.
of a sudden, the insurance companies are gone.
Exactly. I was talking to my actuary last night, and we talked about who right now the plan says here's the allowable charge. This is what we're going to pay you. The hospital makes the patient pay. Why shouldn't the plan make the patient pay? And in essence, what you're describing, Mark, kind of sounds like structurally like a captive, where each person has their own little, 813,
But the
831B.
key is we don't want it to be insurance. We don't
No,
want it
no,
to be
no. Of
health
course.
insurance because the rules change completely,
Yep.
right? We
Exactly.
want this to be in control of the individual
Hmm.
and or the employer.
Right.
At this point in time, if you direct contract,
Hmm.
so hear me out. If an employer who right now self-insures goes to Cost Plus Wellness and uses our contracts, right? In doing so, they make a commitment that they take responsibility for the patient out of pocket, and they take responsibility effectively to pay it on time, and they take responsibility to trust the doctor. There's no pre-auth or denials, right? And so in doing that, then you work with the member and you can say, look, we're going to put this in an account for you, and we're going to take money out for the stop loss, and we'll take care of everything in between. That'll be the risk we take as the self-insured employer. And now the self-insured employer needs help. Literally, the only thing that's stopping this from happening for a lot of companies that we talk to is they don't know how to do it, and we
Yeah.
need to get somebody
Exactly.
on site to help them
Yep.
do it.
Yep.
So if you know anybody who worked at
Oh
a
yeah.
TPA who would like to work as an
I
internal TPA,
I do that. I do that for companies all the time. Um,
so we'll work with you, Ralph. We'll send
okay.
you business after business,
Okay. You got it.
and what we would ask you to do is put your contract on Cost Plus Wellness.
Yep.
Because
Okay.
if you put your contract on Cost Plus Wellness, then we can say, if you want to use these direct contracts, but
Hmm.
you don't know how, go to Ralph Weber. Here's Ralph's contract. You know exactly what it's going to cost for him to implement this. And
Right.
Ralph can do an actuarial table. You can do the spreadsheets. He can look at your claims and then extrapolate based off of, how many, what you've experienced in the past. And you're going to save a shitload of money.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely.
And
Absolutely. I
your
mean,
your patient, your members are going to be healthier.
yeah. And David, I know you're itching to speak here. Starbucks. Is it true, Mark, that Starbucks spends more on employee benefits than coffee beans? That's what I heard.
I mean, what did Warren Buffett say? That GM is a car company, is an insurance company masquerading as a car company?
Yeah. Exactly. Exactly. Go ahead, David. You had something to say.
Well, I mean, we love what you've been saying. And for years, we've been studying the healthcare economy and putting together estimates that, if taken to the furthest extreme and moving to digital efficient contracts, we could save $1 trillion from our healthcare economy. And the only additional step we're advocating is to accelerate this ability for employers and providers to contract directly. There should be a digital version of these contracts. It's like a template. Like when you go to get a mortgage,
Yeah,
you
of
get a
course.
calculator. It's exactly the same everywhere. You get your choices and the
100%.
transparency. That
So
digital
all you got to do is
foundation.
post those at Cost Plus Wellness. Post that on Cost Plus Wellness for people to
Well,
use.
ironically, we're scraping your contracts from Cost Plus Wellness to try to build this because it's almost impossible to get real examples of
Right. Well, that's why
contracts
we put it
to
out there.
build this digital version of.
Well,
That's exactly why we created it, right? That's
but
exactly why Ryan busts his ass to do all this all day.
yeah, I mean, I think you've been working with um, Turquoise too, the patients framework. So that's also been based on some of our work, and we just published a paper on standards like that already exist, like to create all these things as digital. I think how so the tools are there. It's totally feasible to do this. Like there's no question about that. The tools are all there to do it. I think David's done amazing work on prior authorization where there's no consistency across plans. Yeah.
Because you got to realize prior authorization is not about determining what the best medical situation is. It's about delaying as much as possible to retain the time value of money.
But
Yeah,
we
no, I
actually
mean,
did
look,
that.
why would you?
Yeah, we did that as a proof of concept that this is easier than you think. We had one brilliant graduate student, Aya, reproduce all the prior authorization rules of 4 major insurers. And she did this as a part-time project and built a digital version of all of these rules to show that it's actually far easier and quicker to make a rational standardized version of this. So we're building proof of
Oh, of
concepts as
course,
we
but they
can.
don't want that. They don't want it to be rational. The insurance companies don't want it to be rational. That's the point. You can't delay and make money. If you have $100 billion in premiums and you're earning 4%, that's 4 billion a year divided by 12 for every month that you delay. It is not about doing what's best for the patient. It is about collecting as much money. When you are that vertically integrated,
Yeah.
realize that they
Yeah.
make, like on the pharmacy side, they own the switch that the pharmacy processes the claim through. They own the hub that interfaces with the manufacturer and all these, amortizers and accumulators. And then they take a percentage of savings when they're using accumulators,
Hmm.
all via companies that they own. And so, and we haven't even talked about pharmacy yet. I mean,
No,
you
no.
talk about a ripoff. Oh my
Yeah.
God.
Yeah.
I mean,
So,
go ahead, Ralph. Sorry.
sorry, Mark. So what do you think, Mark? If payments became more certain and immediate, do you think provider prices would start to decline? As the uncertainty premium shrinks, the
No,
uncollectible
because the
from the patient.
uncertainty is the insurance companies, and they make all their money by introducing the uncertainty. So as
However,
long as, go
yeah,
ahead.
I agree with you, Mark. I agree. But if you said to a provider, look, I will pay you immediately at the time. You don't have to pay Chase Ryan for his $5,000 out of pocket or 10 or $20,000. I'm going to pay the whole thing. And that was system wide. Do you think
Well, yeah, I mean,
providers,
that's what our contracts say, just that, right? That's the whole point of cost plus wellness, because for the contracts that we've signed for my companies, I have to pay either the day of or within 30 days, whatever their payment cycle is, right? There's no pre-authorization or denials. There's no patient out-of-pocket responsibility to the provider. That's all on me. And in exchange for that, you can just look at our pricing to see, in some cases it's under Medicare, some cases it's 120%. If it's complicated, it's 250%.
Yeah, but so on the provider side, Stanford Hospital. I around to Stanford Hospital. So Mark gives us an amazing, transparent deal, but I'm still dealing with 999 other health plans.
Oh, for
And
sure. But one
yeah,
at a time. It's like 99 bottles of beer in the wall. You take one down and pass it around.
no, I know,
998 bottle insurance
but
plans
but
on the wall.
yeah, until I can get rid of 1,000 people in my revenue cycle management group, right?
Well, yeah, but then the question becomes, why would an insurance company participate? Because the whole reason this problem exists is because they introduced it. They have no incentive to participate whatsoever. Now, if you could do this, the provider could say, look, if you are self-insured, this is the only way we're going to work with you, or you're going to get out of network pricing, you know, and you can incent the employers because that's 60% of employees.
Yeah, I'm still doing Medicare and Medicare Advantage. I'm still doing Medicaid. You know, um, so I totally agree with you. At some level, the question is, how much time do we have, frankly, before the payment system collapses, or in terms of this affordability
Yeah, but that's
exemption?
on Stanford.
Yeah,
That is completely on Stanford. Like if you were a business that came on Shark Tank and looked acting like a startup, right? And you said, I'm going to hire five. Stanford is so overpriced. We have the innovator's dilemma. I have to undercut myself before somebody else does it for me, right? Now you have the challenge that you guys spent so much money on all the pianos and artwork and fancy stuff and everything. And, the foyer and it looks amazing, right? It's beautiful. And all the machines that go ping, right? But if we were trying to disrupt you, we would hire a bunch of salespeople with those contracts and go to the employers and say, I will put somebody on site that's your healthcare CEO who will manage all this process. So it's not even an HR benefits thing anymore. And in exchange for you spending less money than you were spending before, paying direct, no patient out of pocket, et cetera, it's still going to be less. I'm going to save you money at Stanford. It's easy, but Stanford won't do it because hospital CEOs, and I'm sorry, I mean, I've met them, nice people and all that, they're idiots, right? They don't think like business people. They don't. They think, how many beds can I get? How much revenue can I get so I can get a raise, maybe buy some more, maybe get bought, depending on your circumstances. They don't run them like real businesses. I've had, as I've been talking about this stuff, I had some small, medium-sized hospitals come to me and I'm like, okay, maybe I'll even invest. Give me your detailed, financials and breakdown. And the first thing I want to see is what you spend on consultants. They were spending more on consultants than they were on the interest that they weren't sure that they could pay to keep them alive. I'm like, why do you need all these consultants? Well, that's just what we do. I'm like, why don't you hire people that know this stuff already? We want physicians to be able to own hospitals. Physicians run hospitals. How's that been working? You know, the whole idea that you can't make money and I would tell these guys, look, you can make money on Medicaid. You just can't have fancy shit, right? You can't have all those consultants. You just have to run a normal business and you can make money on Medicaid and Medicare and then some, right? But they have their list of consultants. I've never seen a hospital that doesn't have more consultants, in some cases than they have beds. It's ridiculous.
And the very consultant that they need, Mark, is one to look at their healthcare contracts, their PBM contracts, their PPO contracts, their TPA contracts, their stop loss
But that
contracts.
should be something the CEO knows how to do. The CEO of the hospital, if that's not your core competency to know how to optimally run your hospital, you're in the wrong business. And there's a lot of CEOs, CFOs, et cetera, who are in the wrong business in the hospital industry.
I love this talk. I hope some of our brilliant students start a business like yours and get very rich and solve healthcare. I have to drop off now for a talk I'm giving, but a pleasure and honor to meet
Kevin,
you.
you're sticking around, right? This is just getting fun.
And David, and for anybody watching, my email is mark@costplusdrugs.com. If you have any questions, any follow-up, you want to talk some more on this stuff, Dave, obviously I live this stuff and we're into it in a big way and we want to change things. So I'm happy to engage via email with anybody.
Thank you.
So Mark, you're hanging around, right? You're not?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Okay, thanks, David. Yep. So, it is a dilemma. I mean, we need to do this. It has reached, a breaking point. When is it going to break? When is it going to snap? Person after person is going bankrupt. Business after business can't afford real health care anymore. People need insurance for their insurance. The contracts are a big part of the problem. The government breaks up monopolies like Microsoft, but they don't break up monopolies like United Healthcare and the big insurance companies. And I'm not sure why that's different.
Yeah, they spend a lot of money. That's why.
Yeah, could be.
Mark, if you say, just take Mark as a CEO and his understanding of this market, he's there as a supplier to the market or as a CEO of a firm. I think he's absolutely right. Like most CEOs don't understand anything he just talked about. And when you go to the Hill, no one understands this stuff. The people that understand PBMs are few and far between, really few and far between. These are all very opaque businesses. And we don't have a good slogan. Like what is it that you want the politicians
Insurance
to
companies
do?
lie, people die.
Yeah. Well, but so we could either say with firms, we could actually have this agenda where we move firms forward. And if enough firms switch, that's going to put pressure on the market to flip. The other way around is centrally that we get in front of the politicians and say, here's what we need to do. Because we're going to end up with a debate in 26 and 28 about single payer again. Right?
Yeah, look, and I'm not against single payer, right?
Well,
But the problem with single payer is nobody's done it since 1995 with Israel, right? When there's been a lot more complexity. And you've got to go talk to Stanford and see what rates they can afford to accept to participate in single payer, because otherwise they're not going to be able to afford to do it. And that's not necessarily right, but those are the rules they created for themselves.
Well, and also who's in charge. So, in this political process, like
exactly,
when Bernie was running, I was like, you might want Bernie running your healthcare system, but the other team wins every once in a while. And,
well, no, that's what I said. Like if you read Bernie and Representative Jayapal's single payer legislation, the first thing it says in the first paragraphs is at the discretion of the Director of Health and the Secretary of Health and Human Services, right? How would that be working out right now?
Yeah,
that would
exactly.
Yeah. But
Yeah.
so, so if the political process isn't mature enough for single payer, then we need to kind of bring something forward like single transaction process. Again, computable. Everyone doesn't have to have the same thing.
But so single transaction process, where do the inputs come from?
Well, I mean, you could still negotiate those, right? You negotiate X percentage of Medicare if that's what you negotiate my price. You negotiate 3 days or 7 days. We have a
But
little
isn't that
slider
what
bar.
cost plus wellness is
No,
doing?
I'm just saying, absolutely.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
think that
So what do we need to do to get Stanford to post their contracts and eat their own dog food?
it's not.
Kevin, I spoke a
Well, then,
while
Kevin,
ago
I want to hear
to,
because
yeah,
Kevin's
go
pulling his
ahead.
collar on now.
Yeah, luckily I don't work for them, but no, but on the provider side, like I'm fighting this too. If you look at Stanford's P&L, we're spending 4 million of our revenue. It says this is all public. So Stanford's like $9 billion in revenue now, $4 billion in staff, $2 billion on doctors.
Yeah, it's back ass half words,
Right. And so every time you have a doctor, we have X number of non-clinical people telling me to change the billing form or telling me to submit a piece of paper here or there or click the box here or there. So all that stuff is an expense that
Which is
could
part
go
of
in.
the insanity, right?
Yeah.
The insanity is that employers work with insurance companies who define the networks that have the providers, that have the doctors that they deny and don't trust to offer the care, right? It makes no sense in any universe. So the only way you get around that is to break up the insurance companies through the break up big medicine bill, or you find a replacement because it makes no sense any longer. All they are is banks.
Yeah.
Mhm.
I mean,
Yeah,
the
I,
replacement
I,
stuff.
I'd love to do a pilot, Kevin. I spoke to Charlotte a while ago about doing a pilot, and then we put it on pause for a bit because I think this is doable. This is very doable. Number one, having the healthcare contract actually makes sense. Having the terms, say we'll pay, if you deliver A, we'll pay B by C. And that's it. It's that simple. Instead of being the basis for an argument on how to settle. Payments by patients, if they owe over $10,000, the hospital would collect 8% within 210 days. I mean, the DSO is crazy. I've researched statistics by Crow, and I've published, on the deductible cliff. If we eliminate that and make payments instant and make the rates affordable, then companies like Mark could spend less on healthcare and more on wages and attract better people. And in time,
So how do we
that will
productize
solve.
that, Ralph, so that you can post that contract on Cost Plus Wellness, and I can go into every employer and say, Ralph Weber has posted a contract, and for your company, he will take the direct contracts on Cost Plus Wellness and put together a program that works for you so you could say goodbye to your ASO
Mhm.
and their PBM.
Okay. Well, I've got to show you my calculator that calculates that. I've got one in Excel, and then I've got a simple one that I did online, but it computes that number, and it offers a direct contract at the time. We say, okay, listen, hospital, that this is how much you're going to collect. This is your net present value of what you will eventually collect. How about if we just pay you this right here and now?
And what do they say?
We haven't run a pilot yet because we
Well, you
haven't
haven't
had
run a pilot.
anybody willing.
So we give you the pilot by using our contracts.
Okay.
Right.
Okay.
So rather than using your spreadsheet, you just go in and you take the Baylor Scott White. Baylor Scott White is very forward thinking, very advanced, way ahead of pretty much everybody else. And you just look at their contract. And then we'll find you employers, because that's the challenge for Ryan and I,
Mhm.
right? Not finding the employers, it's finding somebody who can come in and transition to
Okay.
make it better, so that, the insurance side, the PBM side, working with Kevin, to create a formulary, so you don't need the PBM formulary. You can just go out and price the best price on the medications. Since the company's covering the deductible, there doesn't need to be a patient out of pocket for anything for the most part, right? Because that's the minimus. And now all of a sudden, the employees are happier, they're healthier, and the employer is spending less, they're happier and healthier, and HR is happier and healthier because they spend
Exactly.
half their day dealing with denials and all the
Yeah.
second order impacts when people can't come to work, they're freaked out about their kids not getting care, etc. If you go through some of the contracts, and Ryan can work with you and
Mhm.
put together a plan and post the contract, then we'll say on Cost Plus Wellness, if you are looking for somebody to help you implement any of these contracts in your company, Ralph's the guy. And then hopefully there'll be other Ralphs that come along from
Yeah.
different areas, right? And then there'll be some options. But if you do that, Ralph, we will send you business. And every CEO I talk to, I will say, do you know who Ralph Weber is? You're about to. He's going to be your best friend. And to Kevin's point, that's not going to change the industry overnight. But just like we started getting people going away from the big three PBMs to the 35 pass-through PBMs, and those pass-through PBMs now have 20 some million lives as opposed to 2 million lives 4 years ago, right? It's a process. And the more people who go away from the incumbent system, the easier it is for their representatives to see what's happening as an example and to understand what can be done legislatively. Not easy, but the one thing we know for certain, one thing, one, every single employer, every penny they cut in their benefits cost
Mhm.
while maintaining wellness, right? Not losing anything on that end because you don't want to, you know, take from Peter to pay off Paul, right? But every single employer benefits. And if you can tell an employer as a sales guy, put aside tech, put aside health, as a sales guy, if I can tell an employer, I'm going to save you money, make your company healthier, which will make them more productive. That's not a hard sell,
No,
particularly when
absolutely
the
not.
most hated industry in this country is health insurance. It's not like we're making you mad, you know, stop doing business with this company you love. That's not what we're facing.
Exactly. Yep.
It's just an education process. And my whole career selling PCs when I was in my 20s, I had to teach guys, CEOs who had no idea what a PC was, the value to their company, then the value of connecting them together, then the value of streaming on the internet, then the value of this, then the value. When you can show people they will benefit and save money at the same time, they're going to say yes.
Yeah.
And then the
Yep.
hardest part is going to be for the Stanfords of the world because their price situation, their cost considerations distort what they're able to do. It's not that they can't afford to do care for Medicare or Medicaid patients. They've chosen to go in a high end, be a high end brand to be, the Starbucks relative to other coffee providers. And so that's where it becomes a bigger challenge. And hopefully we can convince them to participate as well.
Yeah, exactly. And in my 20s, I was an air traffic controller. So I was telling
Just be
people
glad
what
you're
to
not
do.
now, right?
Yeah. Oh my God. Yeah. I'd jump in the middle of chaos, look at everything that's happening and straighten it out. I mean, that's what I had to do.
That's
Zero
what you
error.
do.
And
Yep.
that's what healthcare is like.
I want to just plug real quick Kevin's work. Part of what he's done and is looking into with this standardization in the contracts enables, Mark, we were talking about creating more Ralphs as the implementers for all this stuff that is open source. And one thing that is missing, aside from the contracts being open source, are some kind of standards for how
Yeah,
prices are
100%.
calculated, how the medical policies are adjudicated. And I do think having read some of Kevin's work and his team, those standards being adopted, whether it's employers or health plans, and being published enables a much quicker adoption of the implementers for the contracts.
All for that.
Yeah, I mean, I think thanks, Ryan. And yeah, we've had great teams working on this stuff for the last several years here. Ralph, this is mostly out of the business school. It's not the med school.
Really? Okay. Yeah. And
So,
that's where it needs to be. That's where it needs to be.
but Ryan, on the adjudication side, so the other piece that we should think about again with this concept of analog to digital, how do CBO is going to kill you if you get rid of prior auth, right? So how do we move it from analog to digital? So imagine you have these contracts and you imagine all the services are transparent. Well, then I can profile things. with a digital tool. Like, I don't need 1,000 people somewhere at a call center. I could run a report and say, you know what, this provider is more than 2 standard deviations above the norm. Maybe we should either visit them and see what's going on, or maybe we should not contract with them.
And vice versa, to your point, the providers can run a report saying, am I profitable with this insurance company? And am I profitable with this insurance plan? Because they have no idea.
Mm-hmm. And right now, a lot of employers are having problems getting their data, and that's
Particularly
a huge problem
pharmacy.
in its own. Yeah, exactly. And the digital contracts with a sort of an analytics layer that it flows through, I think that's a big move. So if we get standardized contracts, that really makes sense. That
No,
says,
I agree with Kevin and Ryan. A standardized contract is a huge win for everybody, right? Because it simplifies all the administration, no question about it. I couldn't imagine, like in the NBA, there's one standard contract. You just fill in the numbers, and everybody's got to use that uniform contract, and that makes life easier for everybody. The the challenge, as I said, is not the providers. I can see the providers definitely wanting to do that, right? It's the insurance companies. And so then the question becomes, how do we sell the employers on using those standardized contracts and locking out the insurance companies other than stop loss?
well, I think we have to get a TPA that's big enough, that's independent, that can take over, that can be there to, to jump in, because everybody's scared. If I lose, the big insurance company, I'm going to lose my network. I'm going to lose my doctors. Nobody can get, a physical, a colonoscopy, et cetera, which is not the case. But I think that's the fear.
Right. And that's where HR comes in, because anytime there's change, HR doesn't want to deal with it because they have to sell it to all the members. And, the incumbent always gets the benefit of the doubt. And the HR person doesn't have to deal with the economic ramifications of that.
Exactly. And, we talked about fiduciary. HR should be the fiduciary if they're the final sign off on the contract. If they have an RFP that's run by their consultants that aren't independent, that might be getting kickbacks, and they okay it, they rubber stamp it, then ultimately they're the fiduciary, and they could be held accountable for that.
But they don't understand any of that.
They don't, Mark.
No.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, nobody understands how the benefits, consultants are paid. And they always come in. I still remember I moved out with an employer, and they said, no, our benefits consultant is definitely not on the take from the PBMs and the health plans. And I was like, yeah.
They call it the coalition, right? Like it sounds like something out of a spy thriller. But if you guys ever find documentation to support it that we can publish, I'll do it in a millisecond. I have no problems dealing with, because, we work from the outside in. We don't work from the inside out. And that's really what gives us a big advantage, because I don't care what they think. I don't need anything from the big 3 PBMs. I don't need anything from the big insurance companies. They have nothing that I want or need, and they're the problem. And so I have every incentive to try to fight them. And the same goes for the consultants. The consultants know I'm their worst nightmare, because I will publish anything and everything that proves that they are misrepresenting how they do business, or taking advantage of employers or providers. I mean, the fact that this needs to be done is unfortunate, but and it's the same thing with PBMs, the contracts you go through, Ralph. If you want to slide them under the table to me so I can go through them too, and just
I'll do it.
Just take out the names. I will put all of that out there, because the more we put out there, the better educated everybody becomes.
Yeah, absolutely. It is education. And, but the problem with education, Mark, is we have to we have to undo the miseducation first that the big bukas have been doing for years,
That's the beauty of AI. That's the beauty of AI.
That's true. That's
AI
true.
But
can't mislead you.
It's also the beauty of Mark's approach, which is it's a business issue for the CEO. You've delegated this to HR. This makes no sense to delegate to HR, because it is such a big line item. Like you need somebody that, we can hold accountable, that becomes an expert in this. And, and it's not Mercer.
Yeah. No, and at the end of the day, it's the EBITDA. Every dollar you save, unlike cutting marketing, unlike cutting payroll, unlike cutting everything else, every dollar you save direct flow to EBITDA.
Exactly right. And as long as you're not, doing anything to undermine the quality of care, which you shouldn't. And in fact, you can do the exact opposite with this.
Mhm.
Um, but if you've got if you're a public company with 100 million shares outstanding and you save $25 million, that's the easiest 25 cents per share that you'll ever find ever.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, we've got, so the issues are, I mean, there are a million issues. We could go on for hours. I mean, there's the ambiguity, the opacity, there's the delay, there's the DSO, there's the realization, the actualization of revenue. It all fits together, and it all is fixable. It just takes will. So
This is the easiest industry I've ever been involved with to disrupt.
Yeah,
Because
it
it's so
is.
simple at its base. How much does it cost? How do you pay for it? And what happens if someone can't afford to pay for it? That's it. Those are the only questions we need to answer.
You're right. You're right. And, in 1929, I did a couple of episodes on the Benefit Whisper about how the Baylor Teachers
In
Plan.
1929, you did
Yeah.
the podcast. You had
No,
the
no, no.
first
I did.
podcast.
I did. I'm not
He
that
was
old.
really far. He was ahead of his time.
I did a 100-year history, a 100-year look back. In 1929, the Baylor Teachers Plan.
That's when it started. Yeah.
During the Depression, people were going bankrupt. Hospitals were drowning in debt. And, they started the Baylor Teachers Plan. The premiums were $6 a year. And the whole thing was to solve liquidity of the hospital, liquidity
Hospital
of the
and
patient.
yep.
It was
You
that
know,
simple.
Absolutely. We also, every country in the world has health insurance. All the European countries, Switzerland's got a nice public-private system. We've uniquely screwed up the market. It's not health insurance is at the end of the day. Health insurance is how healthy people take care of sick people. That's what health insurance is, right?
It's just we allowed them to do everything else.
Yeah.
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 That's the difference, because those other countries don't allow you to be vertically integrated and in 2,500 different industries.
Exactly. So there we go. Wow. I think I'm going to have to change my name to the Benefit Shouter instead of the Whisper. We can't whisper anymore. Okay. Let's talk about pharmacy for a few minutes.
Well, first of all, we talk about PBMs as if they're standalone companies.
Mm-hmm.
The big ones that cause the problems, the big three, they're not standalone companies. They're either owned by enormous insurance companies or they own one in one case, right? One of my mistakes is I've learned this stuff and continue to learn is everybody pointed me to the PBMs and I looked at them as being a standalone company acting independently. They don't, right? They are fully integrated, not just in terms of how they approach problems, but culturally the way they approach economics. Right. The same things you see with independent pharmacies where they get underpaid, late paid, clawed back, you see with independent physicians. And the crazy part is independent pharmacies have a stronger and louder voice with legislators, and they're actually getting legislation done and getting settlements with the FTC. Independent physicians, they're like church mouses, right? They say nothing and they get shit on worse than anybody. And so, the point being there that you've got to be able to speak up, but pharmacy has had some impact, but we've got to talk about the bigger fundamental issue with pharmacy and how the whole thing works. And it all starts at the fact that brands and specialty manufacturers sell their products to the biggest three distributors that control 90+% of the market at retail price. And because of that, everything downstream from there is inflated so that the PBMs and the insurance companies that own them can retain those rebate margins. And by retaining those rebate margins, because they control the formularies, independent pharmacies. So I'll give you an example. That's the easier way. So Eliquis just changed the price, but let's pretend it's December of 2025. And Eliquis retail price, the WAC price is $600. Actually, $609, but we'll say $600. So when BMS sells it to one of the big three distributors, they sell it for $600 and they get $600. But then if they're paid promptly, they'll give a 1.5% prompt pay discount and then a 3.5% discount for data services, a data services agreement. So that's 5%. So on that $600, the net cost to the wholesaler is $570. Now they're in for $570. So when they sell it to a pharmacy, it could be a little mom and pop pharmacy in the middle of nowhere or a big pharmacy chain. They're selling it at $570. Sometimes they'll even lose a little bit of money. But the bigger point is that pharmacy is now spending about $570. So
Mhm.
they have Eliquis in stock for $570, their cost of goods sold. Somebody walks in with no insurance. Even though the net price that BMS will end up earning is $300, that pharmacy is out $570. They can't sell it for $300 or $400 or $500. They have to sell it for $570 or more. So now you've got people who are uninsured can't afford their brand medication. But wait, it gets worse, right? So even people who are in an insurance plan, when they're in their deductible phase, how much does that Eliquis cost? If they have a $2,500 deductible, it costs $600,
Right.
right?
Right.
Right. So they're paying $600 out of pocket too, which makes it very, very expensive for the reasons we talked about with medical services. $600 is a lot of money that a lot of people can't afford. And so now, why are they paying $600 when the whole job of a PBM is supposed to be to negotiate better prices, right?
Yeah.
That's what they say. We're negotiating better prices, but they're not.
Yeah, this is happening with the GLP-1s where the PBMs were, it's a competitive market. When we put the drug through the PBM, the list price goes up to pay.
$1,300. Yeah.
Yeah. And and in fact, and so it's become so expensive, we have to drop coverage. So not only do we have the worst of the pricing because the PBM's involved, but then people can't afford it at all.
And
But
what the manufacturers are doing is doing direct to consumer
right.
and direct to employer, and they're
Right.
different prices.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The direct to employer is $700, and the consumer can be $200 or $300.
Yeah. My
Ralph,
wife filled up. Sorry, go ahead, Kevin.
Yeah, I just wanted Mark's done, we've talked a lot about the brand name problems. The generic market's 90% of prescription. So, one of the things, a paper we just published last week was secret shopper studies of the quality of generic drugs. So the other controversy we need to look at is the same mechanism that drives down low price. The PBM doesn't care if the drug works or not. They get paid the same amount. They're not
Right.
responsible for the medical benefit. So a third of the drugs that were tested were poor quality. If we used a red,
Hopefully
yellow,
none of those you came from us, right? Because we really
no,
try to make sure.
Well,
I think
Say that again. So none of them came from us?
no. This is coming from
Good,
distributors.
good,
The
good, good, good.
yeah,
but
my wife filled a prescription during her deductible phase. The prescription was going to be $800+. She pulled out a manufacturer's coupon and got it for $25. It's nuts. But
It's nuts.
most people wouldn't do that. If I wasn't her husband, she's a physician.
You
If I
wouldn't
wasn't
know,
her
right? You
husband,
wouldn't know.
yeah,
Now, hopefully they'll check out costplusdrugs.com. But the bigger point is that the whole thing starts going downhill because the brand manufacturers, especially manufacturers, sell to wholesalers at whack price. So
mhm,
I talked to one of the brand manufacturers, three of them actually CEOs. And I said, why do you do that? Because if, let's just say your net price after rebate and fees from the PBM for that $600 drug is $300 and the distributor made $30, right? So if you sold it to them for $300 and they sold it to the pharmacy for $330, you would make the same amount of money, Mr. Manufacturer. The wholesaler would make the same. And actually, they'd make more on a cash on cash basis because it'd
mhm,
be less cash out of pocket.
right.
And that uninsured patient, maybe some of them can afford $350. And that during the deductible phase, maybe that patient can afford $350, right? And they can get a lower deductible going forward. But the worst part about it is a lot of patients can't afford it because these brands are selling at full list. So I asked them why. Why do you do this when it doesn't make economic sense and it reduces your market share, reduces how many patients have access? And they're like, the PBMs. What the PBMs have said is this protects our rebate because the difference between $600 and the net $300 price, 95% of that is the rebate goes right to the pocket of the PBM, and some they keep, some they put out, some they now offset with fees, so they get to take more on a fee-based basis. And they're creating all these clinical fees and all this other mishigas. But they literally told me verbatim that they would prefer not to sell at list price. They would prefer to sell it net. But if they do that, that the PBMs would reduce their placement on the formulary and take them from tier 1 to tier 2, costing them
Yeah.
10, 20. And that's the same reason Cost Plus can't get access to the
Mhm.
brands. Why won't they sell to us? For the exact same reason. Because those brands know what we've done to the biosimilar market. When we showed that ours, Stelara biosimilars, Stargem does $365, and we publish that like we do all of our prices,
Right.
everybody knows, and that pushes down the price they can charge. So they tell the brand manufacturers, if you work with Cost Plus for your brands and they publish the price, then boom, we're going to reduce your entire portfolio on our formulary. And so going back to what Kevin said, part of those contracts, Kevin, is to make sure to do whatever we can so that the PBMs no longer continue to control formularies, because that's what they auction off and that's where their power comes from.
They also set the prices, Mark. There's a bill in
Yeah.
Tennessee right now, HB 1959, if I'm not mistaken. The Department of Commerce and Insurance did an audit on some of the PBMs, and they found in one case a PBM that owned pharmacies was paying its own pharmacy something like $9,000 that they paid an independent pharmacy $57 for.
Yeah, it's insane.
It's the
No, the
it's the
FTC. Yeah, the FTC has got an amazing report on this of like 6 different business models that the PBMs have created to rip us off.
And they
Uh,
used our pricing for relative pricing.
but
So-
Ralph, you also have
Yep.
mail order, right?
Yep.
So
Mhm. Right.
if Optum puts it in their mail order and then they get a discount from Merck, that's not a rebate.
No, well,
Right. It's not
Right.
considered
Yeah.
a rebate. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So, that's a whole nother set of cash flows.
But so Ryan, maybe you can do some fact checking because I'm just going by memory here. It seems to me in 2018, Cigna bought ESI. At that time, Cigna's revenues were 47 billion. They bought it for 67 billion, and then in 2019, their revenues were 153 billion. Okay? I'm just going by memory here. I'm not sure if the numbers are right, but there's something like that. Okay, I mean, think of that multiplier. Why?
Yeah.
Where?
And that's where most of their profits are coming from now.
Mhm.
So you see all these PBM legislations and more scrutiny that they're facing, settlements they're having to deal with. And one says, well, our profit's going to go down for 2 years, then pop right back up. None
Mhm.
of the other ones even said that their profits would go down at all. And when you listen to their quarterly earnings conference calls, they're basically saying that we'll make it up in specialty medications.
Yeah. I mean, I think that was, to me, when all those mergers happened, it was around hospital outpatient pharmacy,
Mhm.
right? If the PBM controls the benefit,
Yes.
then they can
Yes.
redirect the Part B payments.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's crazy. And then they
Yeah.
buy the oncology center. Even distributors now are buying oncology centers because they want to make sure that the specialty medications that oncology clinic purchases goes directly through the distributor.
Now, Mark, did you say Corleone? Is that a coincidence?
Did I? If I did, it might have been subconscious, but it wouldn't shock me. Or Tony
Yeah.
Montana, say hello to my little PBM.
Exactly. Wow. So Ryan, have you done the fact checking? Am I close?
Yeah, looks about right, Ralph.
Okay. Yeah.
Great memory, Ralph.
Thanks. Well, air traffic control, you have to. So why are we allowing this to happen? How long is it going to continue?
I mean, go ahead, Kevin. I mean,
No,
when we
I
get
mean, it's the same
standardized
set of
contracts, it
issues.
starts to, yeah.
Yeah, it's the same set of issues. Like I got involved, it might have been before Mark started Cost Plus Drugs, but I filled a script for one of my kids for a generic cream at the pharmacy using my benefit from Stanford. And it was like $300 for a clindamycin cream. And I was like, this is nuts. This thing went like generic in the Stone Ages. Why does it cost so much? And then at the time I went on GoodRx and I found it for $100. I asked the pharmacy, why'd you rip me off? And first they said, why'd you care? And then they said, well, bring in the receipt. We'll give you the difference. So I brought in my $300 with my benefit, and then they gave it to me for $100. And then I called Stanford HR, and it was like, why did I get ripped off when I used my benefit? Again, they couldn't answer the question. They called them Mercer.
Crazy.
The drug pricing on our health plan is complex, is what they
Yeah.
said.
So,
Uh,
that's a great point, Kevin. If everybody listening, whenever they got ripped off and they looked at whether it's Mark Cuban Cost Plus or GoodRx and they found it for way cheaper, if they all called their HR department, maybe we're going to start some pressure going here.
CEO. No, their
Their
yeah, they
CEO.
should call the CEO.
Yeah, the CEO.
Yeah, the alternative would be to do Mark's plan. And you know what? If I could save $10, like it stays on my account.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know, so instead of the colonoscopy at the $6,000 site, I do the colonoscopy at the $1,000 site. I mean, that,
Mm-hmm.
you know, I
That's the
should
whole point,
care.
right? Yeah, because what we did say is if you win the genetic lottery and you're paying your $1,500 a month, what would have been a premium that you're depositing now in this bank account for healthcare, if you don't spend the money when you hit 64 and then go into Medicare, you get to keep all the money. It's all yours. Anything you don't spend is yours.
Mm-hmm. And we spend our own money better than we spend other people's money. Like I almost said Marty Feldman, Milton Friedman once said, right? We take better care of our own money. And if there's that incentive, we're going to watch it.
Watch it. Yep.
Yep. Absolutely. Absolutely. It's crazy. Bill, why don't you pop back in here and let us know if we've missed any gaps here, if you're still.
I don't know.
breathing.
Ralph, I've been doing this with you for a while now, and every time I do a podcast with you, I sit here and write down all kinds of questions. And I always walk away with a lot more questions than I have answers to. There were a couple of things though, Mark, and it sounds like a lot of what you're proposing makes a great deal of business sense. So from a business standpoint, you could see how a CEO of a company would be like, yeah, that makes sense. But when you get into the PBM side of this, it sounds to me like it is less a business fix than it would require a legislative fix.
Well, it just depends, right? So that you work in parallel. So you try to educate CEOs as much as possible to not work with the PBMs that are ripping them off and to work with pass-through PBMs.
But do they
as
have a choice on that
alternatives.
PBM? Because if
Yeah,
these PBMs
it's
are not
completely their
standalone.
control.
Okay.
Not only is it their choice, but if they're a self-insured employer, they get to dictate all the rules. They just don't know they can. And the consultants they work with don't guide them in that direction. And I'll give you the perfect example, Bill. If Kevin goes and buys his cream for $100 out of pocket, $200 less than what the benefit would have paid, he should be able to count that against his deductible. I'd be willing to bet that $100 cash out of pocket did not count against his deductible. And so employers don't know that they can dictate to the insurance company running their plan that every cash out of pocket that costs less than the alternative that was offered will count against the member deductible or the family deductible and the out of pocket. They can set those terms, but they don't know to do it. So a big part of what we're doing is trying to educate the CEOs and HR people and benefits people to take advantage of these things. Because again, going back to Kevin's point, the consultants ain't helping them worth shit, right? They're not telling them these basic things. And if they're not telling them the basic things, they're certainly not helping them with the complicated things.
Yeah, I know, and I know we're going to lose Kevin. I know he has to jump off here in just a second or so. So if he goes blank, he disappeared for the purpose.
He didn't get mad at us.
He didn't get
I
mad.
got to jump off in a second,
He didn't get mad along the way.
I got to jump off in a minute too.
But you used the word stupid earlier, Mark, and
multiple times.
Many times. And I don't know whether he's stupid or ignorant. And I think to be kind,
ignorant is probably a better term.
They're probably all a bunch of ignorant people, and it's like, and a lot of us, for reasons I don't understand, because it's in our own economic and health benefit to not be ignorant, don't seem to
because we
become
make it
less ignorant.
Because we make it so complex.
Yep.
Making it complex and putting up these smoke screens, avoid the hard questions that Mark's asking.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, even at the business school, when I run a healthcare program, we have to teach people the alphabet soup and the acronyms and the architecture so that they could see through it. But very few people really understand that. And also, again, no one's in charge of the market. Nobody sees across. Nobody sees what happens if Medicare does this, how it pops
And that's
out.
where we have a benefit, right? Because we're working on the outside trying to figure out how all these pieces interrelate. And to Kevin's point, very few other people are even considering that.
Exactly. So
it's amazing. It blows my mind because, as Ralph has pointed out many times over the years in his podcast, there's a family that goes bankrupt every 58 seconds in this country, which is unforgivable and frankly not understandable. It's like, what are we doing?
Well,
here?
And a good chunk of them are cancer patients, which which is even worse.
It's just tragic. Yeah. Hey guys, I have to close out, but I have two requests. One, Ralph, will you work with Ryan so we can get your contract on Cost Plus?
Yep.
And Kevin, if you come up with a template that you think, you're ready to publish, then let us publish it for people to say, look, here's the template to take to your provider if they're not already on Cost Plus.
Can I get you to do one last thing, Mark? Everybody here? I want to hear everybody say at the same time, we're mad as hell and we're not going to take it anymore. How about that?
Is it raining? And I got a rain jacket.
Mad as hell. We're not going to take it anymore. Yeah,
Bill, give us a 3 count. Here we go.
3, 2, 1. We're
mad
as hell.
And we're not going to take it anymore.
There we go.
Out
the window onto the street, ladies and gentlemen. We got to go. I know Mark, Kevin, Ryan, thank you very much. Ralph, we got to get out of here. Mark, you gave your email if people had questions. Kevin, anybody get in touch with you before we go?
Yeah, Ryan, Ryan, just send me a note. It's kevin.schulman@stanford.edu.
Great. Excellent. All right, terrific.
And post on LinkedIn, hashtag mad as hell. Okay. That's going to be our call to action.
All right. And
make
Ralph,
sure you tag me.
Make
sure you tag me so I can repost
I got to run.
Absolutely.
I will.
Go.
Absolutely.
See you later,
See you
Kevin.
guys.
Thanks,
We're
all
guys.
about to go.
Yep.
Mark, I know you got to get out of here. Ryan, thank you for being here. Ralph, before we get out of here, how do people get a hold of you if they're employers and they're thinking they need to have a conversation with you? How do
Go
they get a
to
hold of you?
mybenefitsuck.com. How about
that?
And just, talk to us. Go to mybenefitsuck.com and find me on LinkedIn. Let's keep this conversation going. Love to have you again, Mark, but I'll be in touch.
For sure.
All right.
Okay.
And
Thanks, guys.
And for those of you who are listening to this podcast for the first time, this has been a really fun one. I wish it was this much fun every time around. But you do yourself a favor and hit the follow button if you're not a subscriber already, because that way, every time a new episode drops, you'll be notified. You can give it a listen. And tell people about this podcast, okay? People talking to people is like one of those rare things that goes on in the world these days. But go out and tell people you like this podcast. You found it useful. You found what Mark and Ralph and Kevin and David and Ryan were talking about interesting. And let them know, because word of mouth promotion is invaluable in the age of bots. Until next time, and until the next edition, thanks for taking the time to listen. We'll catch you next time.
Thanks, Bill. Thanks, Mark.
Ralph. Thanks, Mark.